Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Paperback Possibility podcast. I'm Alfie,
I'm Ashleigh.
and we are here today to speak about Legends and Lattes, a heartwarming, cozy fantasy and TikTok sensation by Travis Baldree. So here on the Paperback Possibility podcast, the way it works is every month, so it's a monthly podcast, every month one of us, and taking turns, brings two books to the other person, and the other person chooses between those two books, and that decides our next book for next month. So last month, Ashley brought two books. One of them was Legends and Lattes, and I could not resist such a wonderful tagline and blurb. And so we decided to read that this month. So that's what we're going to talk about.
High fantasy, low stakes with a double shot of coffee.
What more could you want? So I'll just read the blurb quickly. After decades of adventuring, Viv, the orc barbarian, is finally hanging up her sword for good. Now she sets her sights on a new dream, where she plans to open the first coffee shop in the city of Thune. No one there knows what coffee actually is. If Viv wants to put the past behind her, she can't go it alone, and help might arrive from unexpected quarters. Yet old rivals and new stand in the way of success, and Thune's shady underbelly could make it all too easy for Viv to take up the blade once more. But the true reward of the uncharted path is the travellers you meet along the way. Whether it's bound by ancient magic, delicious pastries, or a freshly brewed cup, they may become something deeper than Viv could ever have imagined.
I thought it was a really lovely book.
So did I, yeah. And I think reading that blurb back, obviously you read that to me. That's how we do it. She read that to me last month, and that's how I picked it. That really sums up the whole story quite nicely.
Yeah, and you don't think that that's probably how it's best summed up. But
No.
actually it is. It's like one of the most accurate blurbs I have read.
Yes, which can lead on to a criticism of the book, is there's not really that much more to it, to be honest. It's like, that's the blurb, that's the story, that's what you get, that's kind of the end of it. So we will start our discussion of the book sort of now. This will be a general discussion for the first half of the podcast, and then we will get to about the halfway point, and we'll go into spoilers territory. We'll very clearly signpost we are now doing spoilers, and everything will be on the table to be discussed. So if you haven't read the book by that point and you hear us talking about spoilers and you'd like to go and read it, that's your cue to get out, pause the podcast, go and read the book, and then come back and hear about our opinions on the specific plot details. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely fabulous. One of the easiest reads I've ever read.
Yeah.
Probably the easiest read that we've had since we started doing this, of all the books that we've done. I don't know how many we've done now. Must be quite a few.
This is our third podcast book.
Yeah.
But we've been doing the Paperback Possibility podcast without the podcast since like August. But we've done a fair few books. This is definitely the most easiest read that we've had.
Agreed.
But it does depend on what you are looking for when you open a book.
Absolutely. It's very much... Could you go as far as to call it lowbrow?
I don't really know what lowbrow is.
Well, if you think of like highbrow as something like Lord of the Rings or something quite well regarded, and then lowbrow is like Twilight.
I don't know. Twilight's great.
I know it's not a question of quality. It's a question of it is a bit low. You wouldn't like this isn't going to win any like literature prizes.
No, it wouldn't. It's a really... Okay, so the book is basically about Viv, who is an orc barbarian who...
Classic D&D class.
Classic D&D class. And one thing I did notice about this book is it kind of, after the prologue, it opened in a tavern.
Yes, yeah.
Like most D&D stories.
Absolutely.
I definitely think you're going to get the most out of this book if you know anything about D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, even a little bit. I think you'll get a lot more out of it. It's definitely an easy read. Viv has, on her last adventure, found herself a coffee shop, which, by the way, if you didn't know, this book is 318 pages long. But the actual book finishes at 80% of the way through the Kindle book. After that, and I don't really consider this a spoiler because we're going into it.
It's not a plot point, no.
The after the 80%, we've got a short story and then the beginning of Travis Baldree's next book,
Yeah.
and an interview with Travis Baldree. So it is like a pretty chunky last 20%, but it's got little to do with Legends and Lattes. So that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'd say the main bulk of it's probably like 260 odd pages, something like around there. So it's a speedy read, very easy to read. It's not like very wordy.
It's definitely a good book if you have reading goals, and your reading goals are in terms of I want to read books. This is definitely one of them that you can read and you can smash out. I read it in about 2 sittings.
I think I did 3.
And I think, maybe I did 3 as well. The first sitting I got to about 8%, and I tell you what, that 8% was a struggle. I don't know why I had like such, and I think you did too. We had a little bit of a bias almost against this book. Like I didn't want to start it. I don't know why.
I think for me, I had a feeling based on how kind of corny the sort of the blurb is, and the marketing and the promotion. Even the cover's beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, beautiful.
If you do look at it, but the whole thing, it feels very easy read, a bit lowbrow, a bit pulpy, and so I kind of knew just from that, I was like, I feel like I'm just gonna be able to blast through this. So I just kind of I put it off, and I was just like, well, I've been reading quite a lot, these last few months, and sometimes you get into that phase where like reading itself becomes a bit of an effort. And I was like, well, I'll just wait until I either need to read it for the podcast or I feel like it, and then those two things kind of intertwined anyway. Picked it up, and the first, I think I did about 5% in my first sitting, but that same day I went back to it and got to like 20%, and then it was 40%, and then I think 60%, and then I finished it. So yeah, it does really roll.
Yeah.
Which is another benefit of the book, is the pacing is very good, I felt.
Yeah, it's definitely, you sit down and you read it, and it's not, there aren't too many lulls. We talked about it with Quality Land, how there was a section in the middle where it was just happening, and you liked that section, I didn't, but it just felt like a chunk of writing.
Yeah, it was exposition dump.
Yeah. And there wasn't really any of that in this book. Of course, that is maybe because it did get itself a whole prequel written about it afterwards.
That's true. Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter. There's a whole load of characters in this book. Everyone feels like they're there for a reason. Maybe, I don't know. We could go into that a little bit more in a second. But I overall really liked this book, and I would rate it, me personally, a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, I was going to say 4 out of 5 as well. I can't give it a 5.
It's not
a 5.
Good enough to be a 5.
No, you're not going to come out and be like, whoa, that was amazing. But you do come out of it being like, yeah, that was all right.
If you're going solely on emotions and feelings, I give it a 5 out of 5.
Do you think?
That cozy, warm feeling. I have read... This book is a slice of life book, and I don't really read slice of life, but more and more I'm learning about myself that it is one of my favourite genres of book. And usually when I read slice of life, it's all towards Christmas, because you get all the winter Christmassy Hallmark books. And actually, in the back of this one, the interview with Travis Baldree, he says he wanted to write like a Hallmark cozy fantasy book, and he's done that. He's succeeded.
Yeah, and a bit of background on Travis Baldree as well. He was originally a video game designer, and he's worked on a few games that I've played, which is quite cool. But he also read audiobooks for a long time, and basically after reading all these audiobooks decided, actually, I'd quite like to write one of these. And then in the interview, he says, like, specifically he wanted to write this kind of book. And I say this a lot, and I think I'll probably say this every podcast. I often judge the quality of a thing on what was the artist's, creator's intention, and how well did they execute that intention. And I think Travis Baldree has come up with a thing that he wanted to do, and he has gone straight down the line and nailed it in a way that, like, something like The Whistling, which we talked about last month, was the execution was very good for the most part, but there were like a few bits that just needed fixing. Whereas I think in terms of what Travis Baldree has done here, I think his execution is perfect. And I actually don't know. I don't know. The only problem that I have with it, honestly, is that the last 20% is like not the actual story.
Yeah,
And I don't
me
really
too.
know if I can actually fault the book for that, but because it comes as a book, you kind of have to, because it's like the book ends with the end with a prequel section and then a like another prequel section to a different book, which is a bit messy, but the actual core of the story, the core of what Legends and Lattes is very, very good, in my opinion.
Viv starts her journey by killing a Skalvert queen.
Yeah.
And if you don't know D&D, like I don't really know D&D very well, that is some kind of monster that has an eye-like thing, gem, something,
In its head?
stone,
Yeah.
in its head. And Viv gets that stone because she's basically heard a rumor or a legend
myth, yeah.
that this stone is going to be instrumental to helping her business grow. So she grabs that stone. That's her payment for basically the whole last adventure. Takes the stone, goes and sets up her coffee shop. And the way that it all comes together at the beginning is really nice. It's really well feeling. I just think it's really. I think one of my problems with this book is it's nice.
Yeah, it's very nice.
It's nice.
It's got no darkness.
There's well,
a little bit, but not
well,
really.
But it's nice, and I think there is something to be said for a book that is nice, but there's also like that's all you can really say about it.
Absolutely, and it's that niceness. If you can focus on that and you can accept that just for what it is, there is a lot to love and feel good about this book. Like I've written here, like my main points are coziness, simple, easy to read, heartfelt, and great characters. And those 5 points, so good. The characters are fantastic. Each character is very distinct, very unique, has a very specific role in the story, and Viv's relationship to each of them and their relationships between each other are all very clear and very easy to understand. The coziness is there because it's such an easy read that you can just, if you like fantasy, if you like that sort of D&D kind of aesthetic and vibe, you'll just love it for just that thing. But similarly, take that away, it's literally the story of a woman setting up her own coffee shop, and that's it. That's the whole story. The twist is that it's set in the fantasy universe.
Yeah.
But that's what the story is. And if you like that, if you like Ashley was saying, if you like that slice of life aspect, that slice of life content, that slice of life like vibe, you're gonna love this book. And I would say that slice of life is definitely one of my favorite genres as well. And I found so much to love in that because there's all those little lessons, there's all those little like observations that characters make in slice of life books about the way things are and the way that the world is, and it's very nice to have that then translated to a fantasy. And then yeah, it's simplicity and it's heartfeltness. If you keep, like, English teachers at school always say the KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid. Just do the thing that you want to do and just throw that and do that 100%. And that's what this book does. It is extremely heartfelt. It's extremely easy to read, but it is extremely simple. And then under that, I've written in my notes, it has a glass ceiling because of that. There is a maximum quality that this book can be, and that ceiling is not particularly high. It's not going to blow you away. It's not going to knock the socks off. It's not going to be the best book that you've read this year. Not in any stretch of the imagination. But you will put it down and you'll go, I really like that. That was really nice. I really enjoyed that. Like a cherry bakewell and a medium quality cup of tea from Coffee Number One or whatever. Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. I wish we were. Coffee Number One.
But
please sponsor us as we take our sips of coffee.
But as I was saying, that leaves it kind of stuck at a certain place, which is not a bad thing, but it is what it is.
So, sort of with the positives out of the way. I mean, there's so much good that we're going to talk about in this book.
Yeah, and more in the spoilers, I think.
In terms of negatives?
Negatives, it's very short. I think it's actually a little bit too short. I think there could have been more. It could have been more. In terms of the plot development, and as I say, we'll get more into this in spoilers, the story moves along at quite a quick pace, and I did find when it kind of got to the climactic situation and then it ended, I was a bit like, oh, I guess that's it then. It does wrap up nicely. It's not like it's an abrupt ending, but it very much felt like, to me, there are a couple of story beats and lines that didn't really get explored. They just kind of happened, and then we're at the end and everything's great, and it was like, oh, I guess we're not really going to explore much more of that.
I actually disagree with you.
Oh.
I think it wrapped up way too short because we're going to talk more about this in spoilers, but obviously we are discussing a book and the way it is all written.
Yeah.
But there was a big-ish event that happened in the last 15% of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that, and when I was reading that, I was thinking, this is a bit early to be having this, because it felt like a final moment to then find out, actually, no, the book is 20% shorter than what I thought. And
Yeah.
it was in the right place. And I think this is maybe the thing. If you've got a paperback book, you're going to be sat there and you're going to see that you've only got a certain amount left. And you're going to get shocked as well. For Kindle readers, we have it at 65% or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's happening and we're like, this is a bit early. And I do think that is something that was maybe an oversight about having that end bit. But I also understand you're going to have what you have in your book. It's your book. You get to choose what you do. And Travis Baldree wrote this book, and he clearly loves his characters so much. And you can tell, and you can see in the way he writes, in the way he's written a prequel, in the way he put a short story about Viv at the end of the book. Like, you know, these characters mean the absolute world to him.
They're his babies.
They are his babies. And you can see, even if you don't do any research on Travis Baldree, you get that sense. You see it about everything he writes, about Viv, about all of the characters, really.
Yeah, like Cal and the cat and the scientist and the chess gnome, and they're all so distinct and clear, but you can really tell, and you can do this. A lot of fiction and media and things, you can often tell, I think, that the creators really enjoyed making it. They enjoyed you can feel that passion and that fun coming through this book.
Absolutely.
Which really does help. But like, I do completely agree. This, whilst I don't agree, I do think it wraps up a bit nicer than that. But I do feel like several plot lines are introduced, and then they're just like, no one ever talks about them again. And then there's this kind of cozy thing at the end when all the main characters are sort of in the cafe together, and it's like, oh, you're here, but I don't really know why you're here or like what you were doing. And it's like, and another character who's like, well, you're here and you've sorted out your plot arc by yourself, and we didn't really have anything to do with that. That just kind of happened in about 2 pages. But as I say, we'll explore that more in spoilers. But I do agree, the structure at the end is a bit strange.
I would have really liked more of a roundup as well.
Yeah, 100%.
The book ends, and then there's a little bit of an after bit that's about a different character that you don't really care about, but it does make sense why it's there. But it just feels like I just want to know more, man.
Yeah.
And that's the thing for me as well. I said to Alfie, I would be really happy to read a sequel to this. If Travis Baldree writes a sequel, I'm going to be first in line to pick that up. I will have that downloaded, and I will read that with a cup of coffee and just a thimlet and just have a good time.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, he's made this amazing world and these amazing characters that we've met and written a prequel. And I don't care about
what happened before.
Anything before. And I think this is very different for a lot of people, because I've been reading the Amazon reviews, and a lot of people on the Amazon store say that they really think that Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is the first one, is a better book than Legends of Lattes.
That's the prequel?
That's the prequel.
That's the prequel, yeah. Yeah, so I me personally, I would actually quite like to read that book.
Please do.
But I probably will, because I enjoyed this so much, and I really like Travis Baldree's writing style. I know that I can read his books really fast, and they're easy, and they're not going to challenge me too much, but I'm just going to sit there and enjoy the vibe, and I will enjoy the story. I will probably go and read that book and have a good time with it. But likewise, I do feel like this needed a bit more to really to really solidify it as like a really great book. It did feel very, the term that's coming to my head is throwaway. It's a bit throwaway.
Yeah, I imagine this is the sort of book that you'll read, and in 10 years' time, you'll sit there and you'll think, I read a really good book once,
Yeah.
and I can't quite remember.
And you'll put it on tip of your tongue Reddit
Yeah,
forums and just
exactly.
trying to find, like, what was that book that was about, like, an orc woman and she had a coffee shop, but nobody knew what coffee was? And I just, what was that called? Luckily, the book has a unique premise enough that you probably would find it quite quickly, but it is lacking just something else. And I think for me, that's a fleshing out. It just needs a bit more fleshing out. 100 more pages, 200 more pages of just, I would say, like that much, like just really fill the world out, because it feels very quick to me.
It does
a bit
feel
too
quick. It does feel quick. Which for someone like me, I like getting to the point. So this book ticks all those boxes. But then, unlike some other reads, and I feel finished, this made me just want more, which is a good thing for Travis Baldree. Write a sequel, please. If you are,
We'll buy it.
If you are watching this or listening to this, because you can, if you're listening, we also have it uploaded as a video on YouTube.
So you can see our faces.
You can see our faces, and you can see the expressions that I make when Alfie says things I don't agree with. And we also have the audio on Spotify if you are someone who prefers to watch things on the go.
Yeah.
So do keep that in mind. What was I saying?
You were saying that if Travis Baldree was watching,
yes,
please write another book.
Please write
and
another
write a
book.
sequel to this.
Yeah,
because this one, sorry, we will buy it and read it and probably talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah,
because we loved it. We did really love it.
Yeah,
but it's just, it needs a little bit more, in my opinion.
I think this is one of the best books for characterization I've read.
100%.
Which again is weird because a lot of the reviews say the characters are nothing.
Disagree.
I fully
Massive
disagree. I think they're fully fleshed out. I think they are wonderful, wonderful characters. I can almost see like Travis Baldree's room that has post-it notes with all of the character details on them. It feels like they were all well-rounded. The second we get into the world and we are building the coffee shop, we've found the space for the coffee shop and it's time to get building. Viv finds a hob named Cal. If you don't know what a hob is, neither do I. I imagined it as a very short person. I'm sure if you Googled it, it would say what a hob is.
I imagine that it was a hobgoblin the whole way through.
Well, that's probably...
But I actually don't know if it is. I am just going to check. I'm going to Google it myself right now. Yeah, it's like a goblin. Hobgoblin thing. Like a builder. See, I didn't imagine him as being short. I imagined him as being quite big.
No, I imagined him being short and like hobbity.
Yes. If you do find, because we might put it up on the screen when it comes to editing, there is an alternative cover that comes with the pictures of the characters on it, and then you can kind of see like which character's which. And I think on that cover he does appear quite short.
Yeah. On the cover, every character appears exactly how I imagine them. So we run into Cal. He is a builder or a carpenter, and he is the main person who helps Viv to physically build the coffee shop because she's found the perfect place for it using ley lines, and she knows that this is the place for it to be.
Yeah, this is where she's going to put her little magic stone, which is supposed to bring her like good fortune, that's the myth. That's how she's based like her idea on, is like, this stone will bring me good fortune, so I'm going to like place it in this very specific spot where the ley lines in the city meet, and that will then make my shop the best thing. The problem is that specific spot is currently occupied by a rundown stable, I think
Livery,
a livery. So she has to kind of tear down the livery and rebuild it as a coffee shop, which she does with Cal's help.
When the shop is all built up and ready to go, Viv needs to hire some help. And she hires a succubus named Tandrew. Tandrew is immediately a character that we're sort of a little bit wary of.
Yeah, is she going to like put Viv under a spell? Is she going to... There's a lot of that suspicion. But there's kind of a funny little interaction with them at the start where Viv is initially a bit like, oh, I was succubus, am I going to get like charmed here? But then Viv is like questioning her own almost her own predetermined prejudice, and is a bit like, is that okay? Or like, am I justified in thinking that, or am I making a snap judgment? Which is quite nice. It's like that sort of slice of life element to it. Tandrew's a great character, and Cal and and Viv are like the three core characters of the coffee shop. Tangerine and Viv obviously work there, and Cal kind of comes in and out whenever they need to do renovations for anything. And then we have the is he a gnome?
He's a ratkin.
A ratkin called
Thimble,
thank you. And he is the baker. He is this. All he said. He only speaks like in like one word sentences, but he is this like masterclass Pixar almost baker who can just whip up these ridiculous cakes and cinnamon buns and biscuits and things for people to enjoy at the coffee shop. And once all the characters are together, that's when the story like really kicks off. As we say, I think I'd give this a 4 out of 5. Would you agree?
I completely agree. In terms of content warnings as well, we were trying to think of what they would be. There aren't
I wouldn't
many,
say.
if
Yeah.
any. There's a little bit of light gore because it starts with her fighting.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of like tension in the book, but it's not really something that is
Not
more
much.
of a content
Yeah, it's not
warning.
particularly. I wouldn't say it's high levels of threat. Not very much violence. Very low levels of swearing. I think there's about 4 instances in the whole book where there's swearing.
But there is swearing.
But
So
there is
that's
swearing.
just something to keep in mind if you don't particularly enjoy it.
There is a description. It's not too graphic, but without spoiling it, there is a description of burns
And an injury.
and an injury towards the end.
But that was the only thing I thought that was particularly graphic.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
the only thing, and that's
it's
towards
not
the end. But it's not
too
too
graphic.
bad. If you've watched
Any modern TV show.
yeah, you're
film.
not gonna. Yeah, it's not. You're not gonna get anything particularly much worse there. But yeah, a 4 out of 5 from me, and definitely Travis Baldree. If you're watching, please write a sequel because I just want more from this world. Honestly,
Now, I want to talk more in depth about this book.
me too. Should we get into spoilers?
We should, which is your place. If you want to read this book, if we've sold it to you and you want to go and get it, it is currently $4.99 on the Kindle store, or you can go and pick up a physical copy. It is sold in a lot of like Forbidden Planets and
Yeah,
other kind of D&D stores because it's kind of, well, it is firmly in that world.
absolutely.
So do keep that in
I
mind.
don't know if it's like branded D&D.
It's not, as far as I'm aware, it isn't branded.
No,
as
not
D&D.
official D&D merchandise.
We're about to start talking about the book in a bit more depth. So if you wanted to go and read it, come and join us back. Pause the podcast here. Now is your spoiler warning.
Official spoiler warning. We will be talking spoilers for the rest of the podcast. Everything is on the table. We were talking about the ending. We'll be talking about all the plot points, every little twist and turn, which there aren't very many in this book, but every little twist and turn throughout. So please, if you have any intention of reading it and want to hear our full thoughts on it, please go and read it and then come back and start the podcast from here.
One of my most negative things about this book
Mm-hmm.
is that and it happened in 2 instances, so I wouldn't even say it's like one of the most negative things that happened, but I found that I was a bit lost. Like,
Oh, okay.
2 times I was like, was that a thing that happened? What was this thing? I can't quite remember. And one of those times it was explained to me. The other one you explained to me.
What are you talking about?
The first one that I had you explain to me
Yeah.
was the Scalvet Stone from the beginning. So I read
Yes.
the first 8% in one go and then took a couple of days away from reading and then came back to it. And by that point, I'd completely forgotten what this Scalvet Stone was. And Viv is so overly protected because it's a very rare thing that she has.
rare. Like you have to like kill the monster itself, which is extremely difficult.
And they're already like borderline endangered.
Yeah.
Like they don't really exist.
Yeah, and then you have to like extract it like from their corpse, and that's how you kind of come to own one because you can't like buy one. So yes, they are. She's, as you're saying, she's incredibly protective over it.
And I realised when I got back into reading it that she kept talking about the Scalvet Stone and I could not remember for the life of me what it was.
Yeah,
So I don't think that one is on Travis Baldree, that is on me, but it does lend itself to, if you want to read this book, it might be good to do it in a couple of sittings and not like
Agreed.
dip in and out. It's not like you're reading a book at the moment where they're sort of like in 20-minute kind of segments.
yeah. So each chapter, the book I'm reading at the moment is Musashi, which is a 1,000-page book about this samurai. But each chapter is about 25 minutes long to read. So, but that makes it quite easy for me to jump in and out because they're all sort of self-contained little chapters of this guy's life as he adventures through Japan. But this book is not like that at all. It's very, very snappy. And if you stop, it's very difficult to kind of be like, wait, what's going on there? So, which works to its favour if you read it in one sitting. But I would agree, the Scarlet Stone is mentioned at the start, and then it's not really talked about again very often.
And then it is.
And Viv brings it up, and she's like, and that Scarlet Stone that I've got. And if you haven't quite picked up on it right at the beginning, and I think that's something that we should talk about more. When you first start reading a book, at least for me, and I don't know how this is for other people, the first 5 to 10% is a lot of confusion as your brain kind of tries to form the world from what's given to you. And so when a very, very key element of the plot is introduced immediately and isn't fully explained then again until about 30% of the way through the book.
I think it was less than that.
Well,
but I see your point.
Yeah. It's difficult for you to be like, what, hang on a minute, what is that and how does that work? What is the point of that? And I found, because I read it quite quickly, through the whole thing, I kind of just picked it up and was like, yeah, okay, I sort of get what this is. But I think for someone who experienced it like you did, where you read that first 5%, take a little break, come back, you're a bit like, what is this thing that everyone keeps mentioning and where did it come from?
Exactly. The other part I got lost on is this book is set in this town called Thune.
Yep.
There's a lot going on, but essentially one of the big plot points of it is that there are this group of people, a bit like the Mafia, called the Madrigals.
My least favourite element of the story, this
Completely
part.
agree.
Yeah.
And their whole job is to keep the city, in inverted commas, safe. They basically collect taxes and take that money to patrol it.
It's a protection racket.
Yeah.
Your classic, give us some money and we'll protect you from anything. But if you don't give us some money, we can't protect you from what might happen. And then they end up smashing your windows.
Yeah,
and stuff.
know it's going to be them.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing.
And the Madrigals, they have this. This is what I found very confusing. There are a lot of people who are bad people in this book, but none of them are particularly threatening. They don't really have a lot of power behind them.
Yeah.
Even the Madrigals, who don't have this massive power. But we do find out that the leader of the Madrigals is a woman.
Yeah. Your classic matriarch.
And she is, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
It's a matriarch. And she is just known as the Madrigal.
Yeah,
and
she's Granny Madrigal.
This is the first 45-50% of the book, 60%. We are constantly being told that the Madrigals are this horrible, horrible people.
It's literally the whole conflict of the first half of the book is how is Viv going to pay the Madrigals? And Viv being this barbarian, she's a warrior. She's like, I'm not paying these Madrigals. And everyone's like, well, you probably should pay a Madrigal because obviously when you were fighting before, you only had to defend your body, but now you've got a building to defend. You've got an employee and a friend, and then Cal at the docks. These are all people that you now need to protect. And if you cross the Madrigals, who knows what's going to happen? So the whole first half of the book is building up to this moment of is she going to pay? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then we meet Granny Madrigal. Viv has a meeting with her, and that's just sort of the end of that plot line.
Yeah, so basically what happens is, and we are fully in spoilers, everything is on the table, but they basically come to an agreement that the Madrigal really likes the cinnamon buns. So therefore, instead of paying money,
she gets free cinnamon buns.
But this was barely explained. So at the end of this chapter,
it's not explained at all,
it was and they have come to a conclusion, and they shook hands, and they signed the paper.
Nuts. I was so angry about this.
Yeah, and then we flip the page. Next chapter, Viv's waking up, or she's starting her day back in the coffee shop, and it's a bit okay, well, that's gonna be a massive payoff. Then there's something really big is gonna happen. Keep reading, and there was enough time between that happening and keeping reading that I was I don't know. If we're supposed to know at this point what it was, and I genuinely couldn't work out, and I thought I'd missed something.
Absolutely, and I think I said to you, no, I think that's it. I think that's literally it. I think it's genuinely, she goes and has this meeting, and Ashley is not exaggerating, she goes and has this meeting, the chapter ends with, and Madrigal's and she's and so the Madrigal outlined her terms, and Viv, and then the next bit of dialogue, and the Madrigal's and do we have a deal? And Viv hesitantly shakes her hand, And that's just it. We never find out really what the deal was. We're left to kind of assume that it's because the Madrigal really likes the cinnamon buns.
I think it's quite overtly stated that the deal was that she was exchanging cinnamon buns for protection instead of the money, the tax. And I think that is not necessarily what I can see it being like, oh, that's really funny actually, because this is like a really scary organization and actually they just want cakes.
They were beaten by cakes, yeah.
But I was expecting more, especially in a world
Massively.
in sort of like the D&D headspace where like literally a chest can be an enemy. Like
Yeah.
everything is an enemy.
Absolutely. And to have that much build up to it.
That's the thing. It's that much build up.
And that much threat of like what is going to happen when the tension really comes from, is Viv going to pay, or is she going to
kill everyone?
And she brings over like her old mercenary pals, and it's this kind of, it's starting to set up as, are we gonna have like a little, like a sort of Peaky Blinders street war kind of thing about over this like coffee shop, but it never happens.
And then we are sort of left to assume that that is what the deal was, and I think it is.
Yeah, I think so, and I think Travis Baldree intended that to come off as like a comical thing, and it's like, it's the power of how good these cinnamon buns are.
Yeah, which is, it sounds amazing.
Absolutely fine, but the execution of it is a bit like, the joke doesn't quite land, and you were left wondering, is that really what it is? Because of the way that whole thing is built up. Post that, we then have the actual threat of the story, which is a previous mercenary partner to Viv called Fennis, I think. Fennis, who is an elf, who, after Viv only takes the stone for her prize from the last job, Fennis, then goes and does his own research, and is like, why did she only take that? That doesn't make any sense. He goes and does his own research, finds the myths, and kind of comes back and is like, well, hang on a minute, I actually think that that's the key prize from this job, and I want that. And so Fennis then becomes this overarching threat, and we have this one scene, we have two scenes with Fennis. One where he comes into the coffee shop and is a bit like, "Ooh, I know what you're about, Viv, and I've got my eye on you and all this stuff." And it's and Viv's like, "Yeah, get out of here, Fennis. I don't want anything to do with you anymore." Blah. And it's a bit like, you know, that sort of vibe, which is fine, and I liked that. And then he comes back in the nighttime, and like Viv wakes up and like comes down, and Fennis is there, and she wakes up because her giant cat. She has this like stray cat that's.
You're confusing two storylines here.
Am I?
This is the problem.
Yeah.
We're introduced to a bunch of characters who, some of these characters, so the main four, very well fleshed out. Everyone else is a little bit hazy, but it's okay because they all have purposes. One of the characters is Hem, who is a student at the local university.
Yes, you're right. Okay, yeah, I remember now.
And he is studying ley lines and wards. So he goes to the coffee shop pretty much every day because he wants to sit where there are two ley lines crossing. He doesn't know about the Scalvert Stone, but he does know this is a very powerful place that she has decided to build her coffee shop. And they talk, and they've had like this little bit of banter and backwards and forwards, this whole experience, until Viv finally asks him. He knows about ley lines, he knows about wards. Can you put a ward, a very specific ward?
Yes, for a very specific person.
For a very specific person to use. And we don't know who the person is, and we don't know what the ward is for.
Yeah.
Until that night when Fennis comes into the coffee shop and Viv gets a pain in her hand, which was explained to her when the ward happens. And she wakes up, she finds Fennis, and he's not surprised. He wasn't really trying to sneak around, he was just trying to locate this stone. And he stood right on top of it, and we're pretty sure he now knows where it is.
Yes, yeah. And so then Fennis then and I think that I don't remember. Does that happen after the meeting with the Madrigal or before?
I think it happens after.
I think you're right. And then we know that Fennis then becomes the main threat of the book, is like to this coffee shop, because the Madrigals have been dealt with cinnamon buns, and we're like, now Fennis is going to come and try and steal the stone. And Viv is kind of going back and forth throughout the whole book, and is like, is my success genuine, or is it down to the stone? And she gets worried that if the stone goes, because the coffee shop is doing really well, if the stone goes, will all the customers leave and, you know, everything fall apart?
In terms of characters, we've got a couple. We've got an old gnome type man who plays chess, who seems a bit wise, seems a bit time travelery, and we're not really ever sure what the deal is with him.
No, he is strange. I don't really understand why he's in the story.
I think he's there for a bit of hope.
Yeah.
And also to tie in Amity, who is this massive dire cat who sort of becomes the shop's mascot. Along with...
And, like, guard dog.
And guard dog, yeah. And Amity is definitely a very good integral plot point. And you were sort of mentioning the next part with Amity. We also have... what was the name of the... I'm not very good with names. We found this out over the last 3 podcasts. What was the name of the bard? Because we have a bard. Pendry,
yeah.
Pendry the bard, who is not very good, but he slowly becomes more and more and more confident and therefore better at his work. And he has a spot in the coffee shop eventually where he plays every 3 days or something a week.
My problem with Pendry is that I feel like his plotline is one that just sort of wraps itself up fine. Like, he does all of his development like away from the story. He starts off and he comes in and he's awful. He's really loud, like way too loud. He's playing a music that people don't really understand.
Think like Ross with this keyboard in Friends. It's kind of like that vibe.
Definitely. And then he comes back and he's still nervous, but there's like a little glimmer of like, actually, no, he's actually quite good. And then Viv is like, pays him to stay. And then he's just sort of good. And
he has his own fan base and people are coming in just to hear him play and then eventually becoming customers.
Yeah.
So that's him. We've got the old gnome man, we've got him, we've got Cal, we've got Thimble, who is a ratkin, which looks like a rat person, which I imagined from the start and thought I was wrong and didn't want to ruin my head image until I finished the book. And it turns out he is,
just a rat man.
And then you've got Tandri as well. And Tandri and Viv have their little, like, thing going on. And it's a bit like, will they, won't they? They both care for each other so much, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of Fennis...
Yes.
Fennis is introduced to us at the same time as the Madrigals are. And the same time as, like, another guy who really isn't, like, integral at all. And is just to give Tandri a bit more depth.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about him.
Yeah. I think his name was Killen.
Kellen.
Yeah. Kellen is basically someone who is a stalker to Tandri.
Yeah. Tandri took some classes at the local university, and Kellen was a student at the university at the same time. And Kellen kind of took a liking to her and very much took a kind of creepy and offensive liking to her.
So we have these 3 sort of villains going at the same time. The Madrigals, particularly Lack, who is like the leader of the above ground Madrigals, and then we've got Kellen, and then we've got
Fennis.
And
it's important to remember important to note as well that Kenneth, whatever his name is, Kenneth, what's his name?
Kellen.
Kellen is in the Madrigal gang. He's like part of the Madrigal gang, and he's kind of using his Madrigal connection to kind of come and try and intimidate Tandri and be like, yeah, well, I've got the power of the Madrigals behind me. And there is a really nice moment towards the end of the book. No, actually, about the halfway point, before Viv goes and meets with Granny Madrigal, and Lack actually basically tells Kellen to go away and to stop being so creepy and being like, you need to shut your mouth. You aren't in charge here. I am, and I'm sick of your crap. And then the next meeting, Viv basically does the same thing to him and is like, if you come around here again, I'm going to knock your teeth out. And then from there, he just kind of drifts into the background of the story.
I do find it quite confusing that because the book moves so fast and all 3 of these characters were introduced to us at the same time, it does feel a bit like they were just thrown around a little bit.
Yeah.
But Venice, do we want to talk about like the big...
I think so, yeah, definitely.
So the big part of the book, this is all very nice. It's like literally the story of how she's building up her coffee shop and how Tandri and her are getting a little bit closer. And
Yeah, they go on a few picnics. It's a bit
you know, had a little bit of
romantic.
a
You know,
date
it's
here and
nice,
there.
very cozy.
Keep in mind that Viv is staunchly staying in her little bedroll. She doesn't have a bed. Like, she's
No.
just got a little bedroll.
She's so
like,
used to camping
it's
from all the
fine.
years of traveling.
I'm good. We'll get to it when we get to it, but I don't need it. So they're building it up. They've got all of these pastries coming out, which, by the way, cinnamon rolls, these things called thimlets, which are quite clearly biscotti, and I love that. They also have these moon crescents, which again, quite clearly croissants.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful world building
Chocolate-filled croissants.
Chocolate filled. And we have this, they build in a ceiling fan or an auto circulator.
We did talk about that, didn't we?
did.
And we talked about how it's very funny in this world. It's kind of glossed over. Like, how does a coffee machine, which has like a automatic grinder and a steamer, actually work in a land that has no electricity? It's never explained. The same with the ceiling fan. It's kind of alluded to that it's like by heat. Like,
it's all gnomish.
yeah, there's
technology.
gnomish technology which knows how to use heat. Like, the coffee machine has like a little wick in it that you set on fire and then it just suddenly works. And similarly with the ceiling fan like has an induction thing over the oven and it uses the heat to spin, which scientifically does actually make sense, but it's very like, that's how it works, don't worry about it.
But I liked that as well.
Yeah, I
like,
did as well. Don't dwell on it.
I also think that Travis Baldree could have just said, yeah, he's just got a plug socket in the wall, and I've been like, yeah, fine,
Yeah, whatever.
I would have taken
There's
it.
a crystal that you plug it into a crystal and it works. I'd have been fine with that as well.
It does, like, that was so not the point, but it's funny, and I
is
really
funny, yeah.
like seeing the sort of like comparisons, because this is a world where coffee doesn't exist. Well, it does, but not enough.
Yeah.
You know?
You don't hear about it as much, but obviously nobody in Thun knows what coffee is,
Yeah.
and that's a whole thing through the whole first half of the book. A lot of the comedy in this book comes from like people coming in and being like, "So it's like tea, I guess," and then Viv is like, "Yeah, it's like tea, but it's not like tea. It's like a different thing," which was all great. But so the book kind of comes to its head, its climactic moment when Fennis. It's revealed to be Fennis, but you don't know this at the time. Viv and Tandri at this point are sharing bed space in the cafe. Tandri, I think, is just staying with Viv. It's not gotten like that deep yet, but like they're kind of building towards that.
But why she's staying with Viv is because there's this threat of Fennis coming back, and the
Yes.
ward's already been broken.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we can't really set it up again. It's not going to work. He knows that that's going to happen. So we need to come up with a different plan. But in the meantime, Tandri, you stay with me.
Yeah, and I'll protect you.
And yeah, and Tandri's very much like, actually, no, I will. You can't argue with this. I'm staying with you because you're in trouble here on your own, and I want to be here in case anything happens.
Yeah. So the cat, whose name I forgot,
Amity.
wakes Viv up.
This is a massive cat, by the way.
Yeah, huge. Like, I was imagining tiger size.
And I was imagining bigger.
You were imagining like the size of an elephant.
Yeah.
And wakes up Viv, and Viv smells like a sort of gaseous, weird smell that's kind of like burning, a sulfuric kind of not. And the cafe is on fire with this like magic green. I basically just imagined Dragon Flame from Game of Thrones, this like green flame that doesn't produce any smoke, but it's burning like way hotter than a normal firewood. And in that whole shebang, Viv gets Tandri out of there, but then Viv runs back in to like save like what she can, and she saves like the lockbox which has like whatever money they had in the cafe at that time. And she wants to save her sword, but she watches it kind of melt away and she can't get to it. And she goes to try and find the stone, but it's not there. And then she kind of comes back out in the like nick of time.
With the coffee machine.
With the coffee machine, which she does save as well. It comes back out in the nick of time as the cafe collapses behind her.
We have glossed over the sword thing as well. Like, Viv is a massive seasoned adventurer barbarian, and she has this massive sword that basically she ended up putting up on the wall, and it's sort of been, again, another mascot of the shop, but she's wrapped it with flowers and garlands, and it's just like, yeah, this is my life now. I now own a coffee shop and not an adventurer.
Absolutely.
And as she's watching the sword burn away, there is a bit of, well, that's that then,
That's
isn't
that.
it?
Yeah, she's lost her coffee shop, which is her present and future life, and she's lost her sword, which is her past life. So she kind of sits there and is like, I've got nothing left now.
And she watches it burn and burn away, and she knows that Fennis has set the fire because the Scarlet Stone is
Gone.
missing.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like we're not going to see that again, and we don't for the rest of the book.
Nope, that's it. And then cue what feels like a montage. It's
It
so
does.
fast.
It reads like a montage.
Of all of Viv's friends that she's kind of gathered who've come to appreciate the coffee shop, all like gathering around her and rebuilding the coffee shop with her. And it's very heartfelt. It's very nice.
It's very emotional.
It's very emotional, and it very much plays on that. The tagline that I made a note of it as I read it. The true reward of the uncharted path is the travelers you meet along the way. It's very much that your friends will come and help you kind of thing. And they do. All of her friends that she's made along the way come and help her and rebuild the coffee shop with her. And that becomes like the lesson of the book. And Viv's lesson of this story is that it was never about the stone. It was never about the coffee. It was about the people that she met and the connections that she made here in her new life. And that was the thing that was most important, and they all help her rebuild this coffee shop, and it comes back and it's grander than it was before. It has a stage for Pendry.
They have double ovens, which was a massive thing for Thimble.
Yeah, so they can make more cakes. The Madrigal lady comes and visits on opening day, and she's like, I'm really glad to see that it's working again. But then she kind of like, Viv like gives her a cinnamon bun, and like the Madrigal lady turns and walks out without paying, and Viv's like, I'm not even going to worry about that.
But that's because a lot of the montagey bit, Viv didn't have any money.
Yes.
Because it all went
Burned
into
away.
well, it's not that it burned away because she had it in the strongbox.
Oh yes, yeah.
But she'd used it all on renovations for the place, and that first initial investment. What transpires is the Madrigals were funding some of like the clay and all of the resources to make the coffee shop. Legends and Lattes is the name of the coffee shop, by the way. Mark II.
Yeah.
While this is all happening, Viv's staying with Tandry in Tandry's place and getting a little bit more
closer.
There is a kiss.
There is a little
in
kiss.
that
They
moment
do have a little
as well.
kiss, yeah.
They do have a little kiss. It's like it was number 12 on lesbian fiction.
Yeah.
I think
Wouldn't go that
that's
far.
it is obviously like two women in this storyline, but I think the romance is very much like at the back of everything, and it's really lovely, and I think that's why I want a part 2, because I want to explore that relationship more. We'll get to how it ends in a second, but I feel like the romance is just not like a huge part of it.
No,
so
it's
if you're
not.
reading this particularly for like a lesbian storyline, if you don't like slow burn, it's not for you.
And you got next to no payoff as
Yeah.
well if that's the reason that you're reading it, because that's not what it's about. It's much more like a friendship story.
It is very much a friendship story. When they've rebuilt the coffee shop and everyone is pitched in, and by everyone we mean everyone, Pendry's clearly like this bard, but he's not come from bard life. His family transpires are all carpenters as well,
Yeah,
so
and
he knows what
stonemasons,
he's doing. Cal's come back and helped, and he's sourced things and not asked for payment. But Viv has always been very like generous when she comes to paying people. She believes so firmly in paying people what they are worth.
Yeah.
Which is lovely.
Absolutely.
So we've been having that, and people have just repaid that in kind, and she realizes that it's not the Scarlet Stone. It was never the Scarlet Stone. If anything, it did help bring people to that location.
That's the twist. That's the kind of reason this chess playing gnome,
That's
this wise old
his
gnome,
point.
that's the point of him, because then he kind of comes in at the end, like with the cat in tow, who's like apparently like his mate or whatever. He comes in and is like, Viv basically says, oh yeah, I had this stone, that's the last thing I had, and he's like, oh, a Scarlet Stone, I know all about those. And Viv's like, oh really, what do you know about it? And he's like, well, the myths and legends have kind of got it wrong. It's not really, when they say good fortune, it's not really about fortune in like a monetary sense. It's good fortune in that it brings people who need each other together to make the best of themselves. That's what the Scarlet Stone does, which then becomes a little joke at the end of the book, with Fennis,
Yeah.
and he is going to find not people who are good for him, but people who are like-minded to him, and they'll come together. And the implication is likely. What does happen with Fennis? I've forgotten.
So we have the end, and we'll go backwards in a second. And then after the end of the book, there's a bit of an epilogue where we see what happens to Fennis, and he's basically walking along around Thune at night with the Scalvet Stone, and he sees Lack.
Yeah.
I've just realised why he sees Lack as well, and then he sees Amity, and it's these two creatures who are very much like out for themselves, like Fennis is.
Yeah.
And Amity pounces towards
yes,
Fennis.
yeah.
With the that is the end. With the implication that he's like eaten him or killed him or whatnot, and he's gone, and the Scalvet Stone is gone, and Viv, when it's gone missing after or during the fire, we never see that again from Viv's point of view. Like she knows it's gone. That's the end. The actual end of the book, skipping backwards, everyone has helped. Viv, Tandri, Thimble, and Cal are all sat having like a celebratory coffee, and Viv's like, "Hey, I've got papers. Sign these papers. You are all going to be equal partners in the business now." So they've all got 25% of Legends and Lattes, and it's a really, really nice, touching moment. And they do all deserve it. It's all Viv's hard work, but it's not, because they've all had just as much of a say in everything that happens in the shop. Tandri has become like the best manager. Thimble is literally more important than the coffee, because people are coming for the cakes just as much as the coffee. And Cal literally built that building for itself. Not only did they build the coffee shop, but Viv also built herself a bedroom.
Yeah.
Which she goes and she shows off to Tandri at the end. "Here's my bedroom, but look, I've also made you a room.
Yes.
If you would like to live with me, I would love to have you." And shows that room, and then there's a big kiss, and then that's the end of the book.
Yeah.
And that's literally the end of the book. And it's like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, it's over. And it's not, that sole reason, I could put everything else aside, but for that sole reason is why I can't give it a 5, because I need a little bit more. The epilogue does nothing for me. Like,
I agree.
It's nice that Fennis got what was coming to him, but at that point they don't care. Viv doesn't care. Like,
we don't really care either.
I don't care either.
We're taught that the Scalvet Stone never really mattered in the first place.
Exactly.
So
and
it's just what it is.
I don't have, obviously I do have like a massive animosity towards Fennis because he burned down the coffee shop. But then they built a better, bigger coffee shop.
Absolutely.
So I don't care. Like, he's not important. What I do care about is like, I would love like a 10 years later or even a 5 years later, and just know that Viv and Tandri are happy either in their friendship or in their relationship or their marriage, or however they chose to feel that love. Because regardless of whether they got together romantically, there was so much love between the two of them.
Absolutely.
And I think that's amazing. I would love to know what Thimble was doing and what the new things on the menu were, and what these little, they're just like crescent moons, but actually they're sort of like wrapped over in a weird shape, and they're actually pain au chocolat, but we don't say that.
Yeah.
Like, it would have been really nice to get that kind of like warm feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's why I think there must be a sequel, because I need one.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. For me, the ending is fine. I don't mind that sort of like, we have that final moment, everybody signs a document, yay, we're happy, look at our wonderful coffee shop, that's the end. Good night and Merry Christmas or whatever.
Good night and Merry Christmas.
But what I felt like I didn't like was the plot lines going through the book. I didn't like how the Magic Girl plotline ended. I needed more. I didn't like how Pendry, the bard, his plotline kind of just happens off screen. We don't really see his development. He just kind of goes, he starts, he's really nervous and crap. He goes away, he comes back and he's a little bit better. He goes away and comes back and he's better again. He goes away, come back and he's a stonemason. And he goes away and comes back and he's suddenly got this like massive fan base and everybody loves him. And it's a bit like, I didn't really see enough of that. I get it, it's not his story, it's Viv's story. I would have just liked to have seen just a bit more. You don't have to flesh out that entire thing, but just a bit more.
I would love a little like side companion book of short stories. Like,
yeah.
This is the bard story. This is the dwarf story. The gnome story, should I say? Because so much of like Pendry wasn't really explored, but he didn't have to be. But I would have liked it. The gnome as well. This time traveling knows all sort of.
What even was that guy? Like, who was he playing chess with?
Himself in the future.
Oh, was that?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
He was like, he said, like, I'm playing chess by myself. Like, that. No, there's no other person, but I just haven't made those moves yet. I'm sure he said something along those lines.
Right, and that's the implication.
And that's like, so I think he's just sort of this omnipotent kind of
Yeah.
guy, but
Whatever.
we don't know, and that's
Yeah.
the thing. And I'd love a little backstory in the Madrigal and like how she got into her place of power. There's a whole neighbor we haven't spoken about, which also she isn't very like important.
Oh, Lacey?
Lainey. But I just think that I can understand people saying that the characters aren't very well fleshed out. I think the core four 100%
Very much,
are,
yeah.
but I don't think the length of the book, the 80%, was enough time to flesh anyone out.
No, I think it needs to be longer. And I would love that. But it is very much a case of, for me, it's a keep it simple, stupid. Get your very, very bare bones crux. What is important to this story, and just write that. And that's what makes it like an enjoyable, fun book. It's a very clear, this is what I want to do. This is the most streamlined sort of version of that story, and that's enough. And it works, but I just wanted a bit more.
I will say Bookshops and Bone Dust is currently $8.99 on the Kindle store, so if you do want to go and get it, it's like double the price. But it's only 354 pages as well, so it's only like a 40-page jump between the first and the second book. I don't know whether that's because there is going to be a load of stuff at the end of this one too, or whether it's...
Yeah, well, I would not be surprised if Bookshops and Bone Dust ends with the first chapter of Legends and Lattes.
It might
which,
do.
You know, is what it is, but I don't love that personally. But
I think that overall, this book I will be reading again in the future. I don't think I'll rush to it, but I definitely could see myself jumping back to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely can see myself like being like, I just want to be in that world again for a bit, because it's not a long book. 4 hours read max.
But I don't know if this is like, I think there's a lot of like people who, when they were 14 and 15, and maybe even now, are going to agree with me on this. But this 100%, if anything, is a book out of all of the ones we've read, both off podcast, and not. This is the one I'd write fan fiction for.
Oh, well, there you go.
I would sit and I would write all of the stories, and the good thing about it not being filled out is that there is so much room for imagination, and I bet if I went on any fan fiction site, there would be hundreds of fan fictions about Legends and Lattes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't disagree at all, and that's nice. That is nice. But for someone who doesn't really write fan fiction that much and doesn't really read a lot of fan fiction, I just want a little bit more, and it is what it is. But I still loved it, and if you haven't read it, do pick it up because it is a lot of fun.
If you have read it, let us know what you thought in the comments down below if you're watching on YouTube, or in the Spotify comment box if you're watching or listening on Spotify. Please do. We love hearing your feedback, and it just means a lot to us that you're listening along and you're being a part of the Paperback Possibility pod. But I think it's time to get to the namesake of the pod, and it's time to find out the Paperback Possibility.
So, I have 2 books for you. I had another book, but I've swapped out that option because they were just too close. They were too it didn't really feel like 2 options. It was kind of one option that was just kind of 2 different sides of it, and we don't need that. So what I have picked is 2 very famous classics that I've never read. But I think it'd be quite interesting to see what our opinions on either of these are.
Classic.
Yes, very well to do. Maybe not classics, but well known, higher brow. You'll see what I mean. The first book is the famous Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood.
Oh, nice.
And to read the blurb for those that don't know, Offred is a handmaid in the Republic of Gilead. I believe it's Gilead. She may leave the home of the commander and his wife once a day to walk to food markets whose signs are now pictures instead of words because women are no longer allowed to read. She must lie on her back once a month and pray that the commander makes her pregnant because in an age of declining births, Offred and other handmaids are valued only if their ovaries are viable. Offred can remember the years before when she lived and made love with her husband Luke, when she played with and protected her daughter, and when she had a job and money of her own, and access to knowledge. All of that is gone now. So that's option 1. Option 2 is the famous Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
Oh, why are you doing this to me?
But, and for the blurb for those who are unaware. This is the story of 4 seekers who arrive at a notoriously unfriendly pile called Hill House. Dr. Montague, an occult scholar looking for a solid evidence of a haunting. Theodora, the light-hearted assistant. Eleanor, a friendless, fragile young woman well acquainted with poltergeists. And Luke, the future heir of Hill House. At first, their stay seems destined to be a merely spooky encounter with inexplicable phenomena. But Hill House is gathering its powers, and soon it will choose one of them to make its own. Interestingly enough, Hill House is very different to the show, and I did know that already, so I'm very interested in that. But similarly, Handmaid's Tale is considered like a modern classic. What do you think?
You can't give me those options. I wanted to read Hill House for like a really long time, but similarly, I've wanted to read The Handmaid's Tale, or A Handmaid's Tale,
I think it's The Handmaid's Tale.
for a very, very, very long time. I've only just learned about Hill House. I think I'm swinging towards that this time.
Okay, yeah.
And I think a lot of you as well might. I've already bought it.
Yeah,
I've
we
just
already
never
have it.
read it.
We already
so
have it, so-
that would be good. I think a lot of you as well might have read it before. So if you have, there you go. If you haven't, I know it's a bit of a darker read as well. So
Yeah, we'll have content warnings straight out the gate. But as I say, both of these books have been glaring holes in my literature sort of repertoire. And I'd love to fill one of those with next month's podcast.
should we do The Handmaid's Tale?
Perfect. I'm absolutely down. So, for next month, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. If you haven't read it, please go and pick it up. As I say, it's $4.99 on the Kindle store right now, or you can pick up a copy. I'm sure there's loads of them in charity shops and everything these days. Let us know what you thought about Legends and Lattes. Do join us next month, which will be the 22nd of April, when the next podcast will come out for The Handmaid's Tale. Thanks so much for joining me today, Ashleigh, and thanks so much for picking our next book. Have you had a good time?
I've had a great time. Thank you very much.
Excellent news. So yes, you can find us on YouTube, or you can find us on Spotify. If you did watch it on YouTube or Spotify, please do leave a comment, review, leave a like, subscribe. All of those things help out the podcast massively. And yeah, I've been Alfie,
I am Ashleigh.
and we will see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is in loving memory of my dad, Richard, who sadly passed away, but his birthday was the 22nd of March. So big love to
Happy
my
birthday,
dad.
Richard.